Welcome back, Troglodytes, to the Trogly's Guitar Show. A beautiful Les Paul Artisan has finally graced our presence once again. These are some of the fanciest Les Pauls produced in the 70s. They were modeled after an old style banjo. That's where these hearts and flowers inlays originally came from. But it's basically just a really fancy looking Les Paul. Now, they're not for everyone, but for Lee Malia, he remembered these fondly and actually got Epiphone to reissue these guitars as his own signature. And I guess they sold well enough that they also have Explorers in this style, as well as an RD. So if this style looks familiar to you, this is the original one. And I just talked about these artisans on that Graco Would You Rock or Not episode, and there was a point where I said that these Les Paul artisans have started to go down in value a little bit because of that. However, now that I've thought about it, that's not necessarily true. It's simply because it is getting really difficult to find clean, unmodified versions that don't have twisted necks, replaced parts, or are completely chewed up. So I think that's why there's so many inexpensive, relatively anyways, artisans on the market lately. It is so difficult to find one like this. Clean, hardly aged, with just some light play wear. Now, this is not a mint condition collectible. It does have some nicks and dings on the front. We've got some buckle worming on the back. But I thought this was gonna be the one for me because it had the blue interior case and it has the right color for me. Now, unfortunately, UPS damaged this one a little bit, and I was heartbroken when that happened. How could they do it to such a fantastic example? Now, luckily, it was nothing major. The switch tip wasn't removed for shipping, so that got split in half. That's very common. I glue these things together all the time. You are left with a forever reminder with a crack in it, but it still usually functions most of the time. But the second thing that happened, this bottom strap pin, it either got dropped in transit and sank into the body, kind of like somebody hitting it with a hammer, or somebody just sunk it into the body for better stability. Sometimes you see that on used instruments. But in order to fix that, I just kind of stuffed it with paper towel, and honestly, it works just fine. You could fill that in with some wood filler and re-drill the hole. That would probably be safer, but as far as it stands now, it's definitely secure. So the Les Paul Artisan model itself was produced from 1976, well, more on that later, all the way to 1982. Now I say 76 because apparently there were two shipped in 1975 according to shipping ledgers, but 76 is kind of like that first official year. Now, in order to find a first year Les Paul Artisan, 76 is kind of a funny year. That's when you start to see the decal serial numbers, 75, 76. I don't think I've ever seen an Artisan have the decal with 99 signifying 1975, but they do have another very shortly lived Gibson serial number iteration. And it actually starts with a letter. And that letter is usually C. So that's the easiest way to tell if you have a very early example. It will have a serial number that starts with a C, or look for one with a decal that reads limited edition and starts with 00. When I think Les Paul Artisan, this is the finish I think of. It's not too dark, but it's not too light either. It has a really nice smoky walnut vibe to it, and that's why I really dug this example. The Les Paul Artisan was offered in 3 different finishes: walnut, sunburst, and black. Now, there is a really rare white one out there. There were about 10 of those made, and they have a beautiful white finish all over. And what makes them even more special is they have black binding. That is like a holy grail instrument for me to document. I would love to get my hands on one of those one day. I've also seen a few refinished in funny colors like green. But back to the walnut color. There's actually 3 different versions of walnut that I've seen and have nicknamed. That's walnut walnut, dark walnut, and the light smoky walnut. And when I think Les Paul Artisan in my mind, I picture 3 pickups with this finish. But there's a lot of people that don't like that 3rd pickup because they say it gets in the way of their playing, and I could see how that's definitely the case for some people. Personally, it doesn't bug me that much because I love the tonalities of a middle pickup on a Gibson. It kind of gives you those Strat-like sounds. But there are a lot of people that seek out these 2 pickup versions because they don't want that middle pickup, but they want the fanciness of the Artisan inlays. So on the Les Paul Artisan models, 3 pickup was standard until around 1978. And then after that point, 2 pickups became the standard. Now you can still find a 2 pickup one in the 3 pickup era and a 3 pickup one in the 2 pickup era. That just means they were special ordered that way. Now this one is actually a 1980. And just from my experience of watching these guitars come up for sale, being sold, going to auction and all that, you do not find a lot of them made in the 80s. The bulk majority of them were definitely 70s instruments, and the 80, 81, and 82s, you don't see them surface to market very often. That doesn't necessarily mean they're more desirable or anything, it's just kind of how it is. So besides looking fancy, these are just kind of regular Les Paul customs. They have a maple top. This one is a 3-piece, even though it kind of looks a different color, that is maple. And they have mahogany back with 3-piece maple necks. And they have the same ebony fretboard. These come stock with what are known as tarback pickups. The reason why it's starting to get harder and harder to find original Artisans with the original pickups is because once these pickups go dead, you can't fix them. They're very similar to like the 25 50th anniversaries pickups, except for those ones can coil split. So the reason you can't fix them is because they're epoxy coated. They basically have tar poured over the back of them. It's really difficult to even just remove the cover, but to ever be able to get to the inside, you have to destroy the pickup in order just to get there, which is the opposite of what you'd want to do. Now, as far as a famous user for the Artisan, if you go watch the Kinks music video for Father Christmas, you can see one of these things live in action back in the day. I always like being able to see these guitars used back in the day, and you don't see too many Les Paul Artisans out there. And the reason is because these things were like over $1,000 new back when a regular custom was like $400 to $500. So these were approximately 2 to 2.5 times more expensive. However, they were not the most expensive Les Paul. I see that get quoted all the time. The Les Paul Artisan was the most expensive. No, it was the Les Paul that was the most expensive. Now, sure, you could argue that this guitar was never actually an official lineup guitar. There were only 77 of them made from 76 through 1979. But these guys retailed at $3,000. So that is 3 times more expensive than an Artisan Les Paul. And that makes this the most expensive Les Paul that was ever produced in this era in a production run of sorts. But I guess as far as a mass-produced guitar, these are the king of that. Another little interesting factoid about the Les Paul Artisan is they were the first model to feature the crank tuners. You know, the ones I call the flip-out winders? You can start seeing those as early as 1978 on these. I actually learned that little factoid the hard way because I had purchased one and I was like, that's way too early to have crank tuners. And then after doing some research, it was true. This was the first model to feature that. Now, I believe that was just kind of a fancy prototype-like run. Not all of them got it. I mean, this one doesn't have them, and it's from 1980. Because you don't really see those start to come into production run guitars around 81, 82. That's when you start seeing those come back, as well as with some other limited edition pieces like the Posi-Lock strap buttons and the 3-point adjustment bridge. So now that we've learned a little bit about the Les Paul Artisan, let's go ahead and hear how this one sounds. How this guitar sounds, let's go ahead and review its condition. On an aggressive scale, I would probably say this is a 7 out of 10. However, I bet most dealers would consider this very good to almost near mint condition for its age. However, I grade all guitars the same, whether they're vintage or not. So this one, you've got some very light string scratches on the face of the headstock, but what's really nice here is the lacquer has not aged a lot. It's got a slight yellowed hue to it, but it still looks almost brand new. This is one of the cleaner examples I've had as far as the lacquer not being completely yellowed. Thankfully, the neck doesn't have any twists or any of that garbage like some of the other ones I've had, and the truss rod has not been maxed out or anything. Perfectly functional, And you have your beautiful artisan truss rod cover. And just take a minute to look at this headstock. It's very ornate, and that's why I kind of like it. You've got the vines and the flowers. This one still has the original nut, and all the inlays are intact. Sometimes that'll happen with these artisans, is a few of their inlays will fall out. That was another thing I didn't like about my original artisan, is I think it was this one that was missing, this little vine at the end. I still had it, but it kept popping out and I would have to re-glue it. The frets on this example are in very clean shape, just very minor wear and tear, as you can see here. Now again, the switch tip was broken in transit to me. I simply just glued it together. It functions as it should now. However, could it break if you're mean with it? Maybe, but a vintage switch tip, you can usually pick one of these up between 30 to 50 bucks if you're looking. But the top of this guitar does have a few light nicks and dings. It's not necessarily a mint condition collectible, but the wear it does have hides itself really well, to the point where this thing will display like a mint condition guitar until you get it under inspecting light. You can see all these light impression lines, some light nicks and dings, and I'm sure a good polishing job would get rid of some of this other stuff. But besides a few light nicks and dings, you're pretty good on the top of this one. Again, you have your original tarback pickups, you have a Nashville style bridge and a TP6 fine tuning tailpiece. One replace part to go over is it's common to lose these little pieces right here. These are the fine tuner adjustments. And this bottom E string one has been replaced. How do I know that? Because if you look at the gripping on the side, they're not all alike. And it should be a slotted pattern, not this dot-like pattern. So not a huge deal. You could buy an original TP6 tailpiece, switch them, sell it honestly, and probably be out nothing. But it is good to know that that one has been replaced. Everything else on this guitar is stock. Back of the headstock. Now this is a fun one. It's Kalamazoo made, that's why the Made in USA stamp is stamped vertically. That's how you know it's Kalamazoo made, as well as the last 3 digits in the serial number being under 500. Now, why I call this one interesting is something happened at the factory. The first 2 digits of the serial number didn't quite get stamped. They might be there, but I sure can't see them. And due to that, I almost thought this was a C serial number example, because that's kind of what it almost looked like. So from the visible portion of the serial number, that makes it the earliest it could be is a 1980. Just due to how the 5th digit is a 0. Otherwise it would be a 1990, and obviously that's not the case being made in Kalamazoo like this. Now the back of the headstock is in good shape. There is a little ding right here by the tuning peg. It likely just bumped up against something one day. And you've got a little bit of edge wear at the top, but I love the way this guitar looks right here at the top. It's got a lot of nice wood grain to it. The neck is definitely a nice 60s profile, and again, this is a maple neck. And there's one very small ding we need to go over here, and it's right here. It's kind of hard to see. You don't see it in all lighting situations. And honestly, you can just barely feel a small impression if you're trying to feel it. Now when you're playing, you're not really going to feel that at all because it's not really where your hand is. When you play, at least it's not where mine is. But it is there and good to know about. And now on to the back. Perfectly clean, right? Mint condition? Nope. Get it in the light. You can see somebody wore a belt buckle while playing this thing. This is the only thing that kind of degrades its condition in my eyes, but I like that it still presents well. Now, if the finish was actually broken and chewed up, then you would see this example not fetch for quite as much money, but you've only got a few minor nicks and dings on the back besides the buckle worming. So this is a nice example for someone who's like a collector player. They don't want to be terrified to touch their instruments, but they also still want a clean looking one, because this one has some nice wood grain on the back as well. Now, something to go over is this screw right here. This happens a lot where the factory drills it in wrong or the wood splinters while they're doing it. So it doesn't really screw into anything, but it is still present. And this one features both a ground wire as well as the shielding tin. Now, I've seen this a lot, and I used to think that it was because the ground wire was added after the fact, but I don't believe that's the case with this one. Now, when I got this guitar, the ground wire had accidentally come up. It wasn't actually soldered to the pot, so I did touch that solder joint up. I didn't add any new solder to it, but I just thought, well, if it's there, we might as well connect it. And besides that, everything else appears to be untouched. Sides of the guitar, similar story to the back. You've got some impressions from resting against someone's jeans or their rivets, something like that. But for the most part, we're in good shape here. Again, this thing was sunk into the body. You wouldn't really be able to tell just by looking at it right here because I just stuffed it with some paper towel and I was able to re-secure this strap button without doing any permanent modifications. So the only evidence of that is you've got a little bit of paper towel sticking out. If you were to cotton swab that and then just pick the rest of that away, nobody would ever know. And then you've got a few nicks and dings right here as well. That's probably the worst one on the guitar. But, for the most part, as far as an artisan goes, this is a really nice example. It's got the look, it's got the two humbuckers, which many people ultimately prefer, and it's just a fantastic example. So let's go ahead and look at it under Blacklight. Face of the guitar, everything's looking good. You can see the knobs are glowing the way they should. I would say the most major ding is right up here on the horn of the guitar, but as far as dings go, it's fairly minor. The sides are also looking in good shape. Definitely no finished touch-ups on this one, but you do have a little bit of stand rash down here. Minor case, but it is there. And everything looks good on this side as well. The back, it looks like you might have a little bit of stand rash right here, but in normal lighting situations, I didn't see it. This is kind of one of those cases where only the Blacklight will show you some of this wear. Back of the neck, everything's looking good to me. No major wear and tear, and no breaks, cracks, or repairs. And this is how you can tell that factory stamping wasn't perfect, because if this didn't glow right, or there was anything else off about this guitar, then I might be suspicious of it. But you can write that off as just a factory anomaly because everything else checks out on this guitar. Everything's good around here, as is the face of the headstock. Now, unfortunately, this guitar does not have the original case. The guy who sold this to me sold it as an original case, but this is not a Gibson case. It looks pretty darn similar, but there's a few things to look at. This texturing is wrong. It's a little bit too large. You can see here on an original Gibson one that the pattern is much more closely fit. You don't really see the texturing from far away like you do on this example. Secondly, there's no Gibson logo. There was a short period of time when they didn't put it on, but this is not one of those. Another is how this handle is attached. I would actually say this is a superior way to do it. You can see they have a metal loop inside of the handle that's attached to this metal loop. Whereas on these, they're just kind of little brackets that they put a plastic handle on, and you wonder why they fall off all the time. The latch placement is also a little bit different, but for the most part, the latches do look fairly similar. And the next thing is just the interior. A blue interior Gibson case from this time period does exist. It's fairly rare, and it's my favorite case to put these types of artisans in because it really pops the finish. I mean, just take a look at this one. But when you feel it in person, it's a little more coarse and rough as compared to this type of material that they would have been using in this time frame. You can also see they had a little sponge there for extra protection. Whereas this one, it does have it, but it's built into the case. Another difference is the neck rest sits up higher, whereas an original Gibson case wouldn't look like that. So no, this isn't an original case for this guitar, but it is very similar, and it has the best color interior for one of these that you can have. I mean, this one's been used, it's got some wear, but for the most part it's in fairly clean shape. The fit isn't perfect, you can see it slides up and down, and that's how that got smashed into the guitar. But to be fair, the original Gibson ones weren't that great either. If you think you might be interested in being the next owner of this absolutely beautiful Les Paul Artisan, feel free to contact me on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Troglys, Troglys. Thank you, Troglodytes, for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.